Shall I wait a couple of minutes? Do you think it's? I don't know. Okay, well, I'll just fire away. So I'm gonna talk about Volaticus, the human-powered aircraft we're building at Sheffield University. Was anyone not here on my talk last year that would miss out on that? Okay, so because I talked about the principles of flying wings, and I could go on about that for hours, but I want to keep it short and concise and talk about everything. So basically, the basic concept of the aircraft is it's a flying wing that's mounted on a weight shift mechanism for pitch control, and we're trying to keep it really simple. The main objective of the aircraft is it's designed around attempting both Kremer prices. So we want to build something that's fast and maneuverable. So for that reason, we've really reduced the wingspan. So our wingspan is 18, extendable to 22 meters. And we've tried to keep it really light in order to cope with a really low wing area. So, yeah. Basically, we brought this aircraft last year for the first time to Lasham, and we managed to fly it, but well, we proved several things. Basically, that the concept kind of works, but our build was relatively poor. Our wings were actually of really good quality, but our fuselage and propeller could do much better. So our propeller actually broke and our transmission system failed. So all we could do was really push the aircraft into the air ourselves. First with the aircraft without any weight, controlling it by running alongside it, and then with our human ballast with Hania.
Might still be working on the aircraft.
She's probably patching the aircraft up. Huh? So that's Hania's flight. So we did several of these little hops, which is basically pushing it into the air. I mean, Hania weighs, she's now gained 5 kilos. Now she weighs 40 kilograms. She was 35 kilograms at the time. So she's very light and perfect ballast. But basically, what? No, next. I kind of did this in the wrong order, didn't I? I'm kind of getting all mixed up here, but just come along. So, yeah, I've mentioned this already. The weight of our aircraft, our target weight is 21 kilograms. Last year's aircraft weighed about 29 kilograms. This year's it's 25.3. So that's why I put it between 21 and 29. Our design target is 21 in order to achieve what we want to achieve. So currently we're still a bit heavy, even with this year's fuselage. Why did we build a flying wing? Well, really because we like flying wings. So we wanted to build one. We think it will keep things light and simple, especially because to achieve the marathon Kremer price, you need to go really fast, and you really need to get rid of parasitic drag. And getting rid of things is the most efficient way of doing so. So by that logic, we thought, well, just have the wing and that's it. We're not quite there yet. Don't know if we will ever be, but so that's what we designed. Well, opted for a flying wing. The caveat with flying wings is that, in principle, they're great, but as soon as you need to control them and you need to trim them and you need to put elevons on them, they ruin your lift distribution completely, and so that kind of defeats the purpose of flying wings. So by banging our heads quite a bit, we sort of realized that weight shift mechanisms are probably the best solution for that. And not only that, but they use them in hang gliding and flex wings already, so they're sort of tried and tested. Reason being, you don't need a surface deflected on your wing in order to pitch. All you need is to actually change the angle of attack of the complete wing. The problem then is you really need to get your airfoil right, because it needs to give you the right properties. Basically, it needs to give you a really nice nose-up moment, whereas a traditional cambered airfoil gives you a very strong pitch-down moment. So we need a slight nose-up moment, but we also need a very high lift-to-drag ratio. So it still has to be low drag while providing you a bit of a nose-up. And that's for trim. We also had to work hard to make sure the aircraft was at least longitudinally stable. And to be honest, we worked for a whole year just making sure it was longitudinally stable in paper before building it. So that's just a diagram of the basic principle. There's many ways of understanding this, but on a traditional aircraft, you have a nose down moment on your cambered airfoil. A condition for stability is that your CG has to be in front of your aerodynamic center. It's called neutral point if it's for the whole aircraft. But that's the condition for stability. That has to be in front. So you can see that if you have a nose down moment, like on a cambered aircraft, you need a tail to balance that. In our case, because the aircraft needs to be stable, so the CG needs to be in front of that point, the weight and the lift produce a nose down moment. So that's why we need to counteract that with a slight nose up moment. Now the problem is, to do that, you do what is called reflex. I'm sure most people will be familiar with what a reflex is. It's basically a slight slant. It's an upwards flap that gives you that moment. The problem is if you put too much of it, it gives you drag. If you put too little of it, it doesn't give you enough moment. So without going into the really fine details, because that is really a presentation on its own, we banged our head. Well, Tim banged his head for a whole year, producing an airfoil that will give us the properties we needed. So we examined. Well, we went through different thoughts. We built different models of what we thought the pitching mechanism should be and what the weight shift mechanism should be. Our initial design was something like this: a wing that was mounted on two bars, which you pushed, and then it slid backwards and forwards. And then we kind of realized that was stupid because when you push, it doesn't create an opposite force, so it just wants to fly away. Whereas that sort of system, where you actually don't just shift away, but what you're really doing is changing the angle of attack of the aircraft. What happens is when you push on it to go slower and increase that angle of attack, the aircraft creates an opposite force, so it wants to come back to equilibrium. So having decided that, we decided to go and build it. The first thing we did, of course, was to produce an airfoil and then produce a little model made of very simple Depron spars. So we did loads of those tests, to just convince ourselves that's how it works. That's where you need to put your center of gravity. Do our calculations for that. That point is really critical. Basically, that aerodynamic center that's the point about which, no matter what your angle of attack is, the moment is constant. So it's a very useful reference point, but you have to calculate it and you have to get it right. So making these models was really reassuring, because we were able to calculate the aerodynamic center. Well, you've seen the video, and convince ourselves that that we can get it right before we go and build a massive wing and throw ourselves off it. So I'll talk a little bit about the build, which I didn't talk about last year. I just talked a lot about ideas. The wing is all carbon fiber and Depron construction. Basically, it's quite simple. I think it's probably inspired by the fact that most of us are model plane builders, and we're very lazy. I like to make things very, very simple. So it's quite a simple wing, really. The tricky bit, if you've actually gone and seen the plane, is that if you can see the reflex on this, the reflex on those airfoils ends on a very, 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 very thin trailing edge. And that's quite critical for the properties of the airfoil. So making them was really difficult because those trailing edges are very fragile. And you end up with a lot of broken ribs, which you have to rebuild. And it's a very time-consuming thing. We spent the whole summer of 2013. We started thinking about this project in 2012. I think we started building it in summer 2013, and we flew it for the first time in summer 2014. So our summer 2013 was spent doing that till very long hours.
You'd add that we had the rather optimistic view that we might be able to build and fly it. And
yeah, we thought, oh, let's build it in 3 weeks and go to the 2013 Icarus Cup. So that's us being very optimistic. So yeah, well, I'm not going to go in massive detail about our build last year, but basically it was an aluminum fuselage with steel bearings, a really makeshift propeller hub and propeller. And well, really what we got out of this is that the wings work. The airfoil on the full-scale wing provides a positive pitch-up moment, which is really, really nice. That they're stable, which was very concerning. Well, you can calculate it, but we didn't manage to test the ailerons because we actually built ailerons into the wing for roll control, but we went a bit too far with making them very light, and the hinging mechanism that we put in place is just not suitable. And also we were trying to do it via an electronic system that was completely bespoke and that completely packed up. So we didn't manage to test the ailerons. The other things we got out of this is that the lateral stability and the control with a vertical fin seem to be very good. So we're basically, from those results, the question was, shall we get rid of it or not? Because we ideally don't want a vertical fin, but it maybe probably is necessary. And the fuselage and transmission were just not really properly built, and heavy as well. It was 29 kilograms. How am I doing with time?
Take as long as you want.
Yeah? Okay. So I'll just talk a little bit about what we changed from last year's versions to this year's. So we changed the fuselage completely. We went all carbon fiber to try and really make it lighter. We found from last year's tests that our fuselage, having 2 wheels and our wing being mounted on a really thin wing bracket for pitch control, tended to, like if those are the wings and that's the fuselage tended to pancake like that unless you put bracing on it. So from all the tests, we decided to actually brace the wings, but not to the fuselage, to the control column. So for that reason, we need the fuselage to be stable on its own, independent of the wings. So we made a trike type configuration. What else here? Well, we added a free castering nose wheel because, Bill told us to, and he was basically right. It's really hard not to be able to steer when you're pushing an aircraft down a runway. This year it proved that it actually steers too much, but think about that.
It's better than not enough.
Exactly right. Yeah, it's and we put a nice adjustable boom for the pedal crank so different people can pilot it, because last year's version was set for one pilot. he's an excellent pilot. He's 55 kilos. He's a pilot and he's a cyclist. But he's also damn smart, and he went to work in NASA, so he's left. So we don't have him anymore.
Take it.
Yeah. So that's me left to fly, and well, a few of us were trying to work on our weight. So yeah, all carbon fiber construction. Did I just repeat that? Yeah. Well, that's just a different picture. We decided to change the transmission system as well. We had a bike chain, twisted bike chain, so we decided to go at least for a twisted belt drive, which is just very much lighter, and we thought it would get rid of the twisting problems. Turns out it didn't, but at least it's lighter.
It was lighter.
It was lighter. Previously, the prop was just built out of hot wire cut foam. This year, okay. This year we built it more like a traditional wing, except that each rib is at a different angle, with a really strong carbon fiber spar. So the prop construction is now a carbon fiber spar with Depron ribs, balsa wood. Am I showing the prop here? No. Balsa wood for the trailing edges, and for the leading edge we basically sprayed it with expanding foam till it looked like a big ugly pancake, and then sanded it down till we could see the ribs to get a nice leading edge, because it's quite difficult to get a nice leading edge out of something that small. And the one thing about our prop that's different from everyone else's is that ours seems to be much thinner, and the calcs basically say it should be that thin, and then you build it. Well, actually, they say it should be thinner than that to have a really big aspect ratio. But then the Reynolds number starts to become really low for the airfoil. So we first built one that was had like a 10 centimeter chord section in the middle, and then looked at it and went like, no, let's just recalculate a slightly wider one. But
What's your speed, prop speed?
it's 160 RPM.
So the tip speed is
It's
actually tip Reynolds number, isn't it?
yeah. So we decided to keep it and trust our calcs. We can't say anything about how well or how bad it works just yet, because we haven't flown it.
We haven't even tuned it for
Yeah.
a flight.
The other things we did is we took all the horrible mylar we had on our wings, which was all wrinkled, and used this solar film product called Solite, which is really, really nice to work with. It shrinks really well with an iron. It's slightly lighter than mylar. Sorry, it's slightly heavier than mylar, but it's a lot more expensive. But we thought it was worth it for the finish it gives us. And then the drivetrain basically gave us a lot of trouble over the last couple of days, because it turns out that when you go full whack on the propeller at high torque, it starts skipping teeth, and you need a very high tension on that. And also, our propeller shaft was overhung from there, which was really bendy. So we've wasted a lot of time basically building a tensioner and adding a boom to that so that it doesn't bend. So now that works fine, and we're actually pretty pleased with that, because it's quite light if you remove the tensioner or make that tensioner less makeshift. So that sort of brings us to today. Have you all, well, was anyone not here this morning for today's flight tests? So basically what we did was 2 fast taxis, because we want to get a feel for how that trike fuselage behaves. We also added bracing to the wing, that's to the control column, and the wing is actually now free to rotate about the fuselage on the roll axis. So it's pretty much turning into a flex wing, a human power flex wing, slowly. So we achieved 2 fast taxis with that and 1 takeoff attempt. And I say attempt because our prop skin ripped off and it was 8:30, so we had to get off the runway. So we basically, we still have quite a few things to try because we want to try several ideas for roll control. We've put spoilers on the wing to try and achieve a sort of coordinated turn by dumping lift on one wing, creating drag. But we haven't managed to test those. And also well, you've noticed that we've decided to test it without the vertical fin. On today's tests, it really tended to veer to the left. We're still not very sure whether it was because of the crosswind or the torque of the prop or just bad handling.
The wing are a bit twisted. So we see
Yeah.
so that's
So we're gonna do a bit more tests to determine what that was. And we're probably gonna try a few more tests with our vertical fin on to try and keep it straight.
Just so we can get some flight
More
noise.
easily. So I'll go into a bit of something I think was quite interesting. So we did a lot of calculations for, well, any questions so far about the test and the build? Yeah.
Is the vertical fin controlled?
Yeah, it's gonna be controlled. Yeah, it's a very simple cable mechanism.
we were looking at it earlier. You could see that it's got a sort of self-centering mechanism with the elastic sort of.
Oh, we might have
Bands, yeah.
So it's got freedom to move.
Yeah.
And then we can see you've got some fine filament cables.
And it goes back to neutral when it's
And where would those cables would attach to the wings? So when the wing moved, you don't.
So-
it was actually directly attached to the control column.
So actually-
last year.
So you mean the actual control
Yes.
for that? We're gonna basically put a bar here
Yes.
that rotates freely around there.
I was just wondering whether you could, if you've got a weight shift main wing,
Mhm.
a weight shift control main wing, so you're going to put a lateral control input in order to change direction. That will change the geometrical distances between one side of the wing and the tail. You could actually link
Yeah, That could
that together so that it became an automatic,
With-
coordinated part of the.
that's a good and timely point. We're still building it.
Your wing's very narrow, very high aspect ratio. Have you got any torsional bracing for it? Just to stop it from twisting it. It's harder and harder to stop that twist as you go out to that.
So
We don't have any torsional bracing
No.
actually. Basically, we've realized, sort of on the engineering judgment, that the pitching moment of the airfoil is
very low.
very low upwards, because the spar actually has 0.90 plies and it relies completely on the epoxy matrix for torsion. Perhaps it could be a good idea to put torsional bracing, because one of the things that we were especially worried about last year before we flew it is that could create a divergent wing, because if your wing is deflecting, gets more load, then the pitch up moment will deflect it upwards more, and then you get more pitch up moment which deflects it upwards more, and then more and more and more until it snaps. That is if that pitch up moment is quite high. So we sort of proved that it's low enough not to do that.
I mean, we should in our design though, we've made sure that as the alpha increases, we still have the negative gradient for moment. So with an increase in alpha, you still do get a reduction in moment, even though it is still positive. So we will avoid the divergence phenomenon.
So have you reduced the reflexing as it goes towards the tip?
As it goes to.
As it goes to the outer wing tips, has the reflex in the section been reduced?
We haven't changed the reflex, but we've changed the airfoils. So we've sort of done,
It's
well,
very
Tim's
dynamic.
done like aerodynamic backup, exactly. So the airfoil correct me if I'm wrong, the airfoil at the tip is basically more optimized for the local lift coefficient at the tip and the Reynolds number at the tip. So the reflex, we've tried to keep the pitching moment almost constant throughout.
There's a slight
The wing, because it's so low that you really need it throughout the wing.
When the wing's deflected under full load,
Yeah.
does that not affect the overall pitching moment at the centre?
So geometrically, in a normal traditional swept wing, you would get a lot of twist off, but in our wing, as it's a plank configuration, you do have the bending moment, but it doesn't affect the local alpha so much. So we can operate at a much more sort of we can make a much more accurate guess of what the.
So that's why we didn't do a swept back wing, basically a plank, because we were really worried about torsion. Sure.
Did you utilise the scrap control wing information that I gave you last year, or compare it with that?
We've been meaning to look into that, but I lost the.
Because
you gave us a link, didn't you?
Field as scrap was at the turn of the last century.
Unfortunately, I managed to. I saved the link on here, and then I probably lost all the contacts and links that I have.
Most of the information you wanted from that link, or at least
Is
compare.
something we should look into again. We talked just before we left. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll give. Well, I mean,
If we could get it
look
again,
at
that'd be
and
fantastic.
check it out. But it would be interesting to see the comparison between what Spratt did
Yeah.
then, 100 years ago, and what you're doing now.
I wonder what speed range you've looked at. What's the equivalent of VNE? Is usually at higher speeds there's more torsion.
Well, to be honest, we haven't looked at the limiting factor for the torsion, because we don't have enough data for the torsional limit strength of our spar, which we probably should get, but we can't.
Is that the applied?
Yeah. We can't really. I mean, from the power curves, I don't think we can pedal this aircraft past about 15 meters per second.
So our
And
assumption,
that would be really pushing it.
our assumption is that the VNE is limited by performance of the human
Yeah.
engine rather than by the structure.
Normal way to get the speed is go that way.
Oh, yeah.
You put your spoilers on the outside. You didn't want to lose lift, so why didn't you put drag tips? Some sort of fin with a drag plate on the tip, which would have done the same thing. Would have dropped the wing dragging on that wing.
Oh, but we also want to lose lift, because I'll
But
give you a
if
little
you're so
coordinate.
close to the ground, you end up
Well-
the wing out. You want to keep that wing flying. You could have just added a bit of drag on the tip, which would have just spun it around and reduced the speed of that wing on the inside. Is going to reduce
Yeah.
lift anyway.
Possibly,
If you
but
put the spoiler,
Yeah.
you're making it doubly inefficient.
yeah, we had several ideas over the last few months, but there are just too many, and it was hard to decide what to do. And in the end, we just really ran out of time for this.
That's a simpler mechanism than mucking about with a central panel on the outside.
I mean, even a drag tip has mechanisms which can be, that can complicate it at such a long and high aspect ratio. But especially when you sort of add in the fact that it's deflected about 7 meters up.
You've got a nice tube there which would act as a conduit for any cable feeds that you wanted, and just,
It is something that we still need to look into to get the coupled and coordinated turns, especially in your control for our aircraft.
Well, I'll sort of just briefly brush through some results. A lot of the analysis for our plane runs as part of thesis projects from people, and this year we've had a master student that has been looking at the dynamic stability of the aircraft, and I think the results are pretty interesting. So the objective, what I'm going to show is all his work, basically. So far, he's still writing it up. His objective was to do a full aeroelastic analysis of our aircraft, because that's what really worries us. But we kind of realized, not soon that's really difficult, and we didn't really even understand the basic rigid body modes of the aircraft enough to do this. So we've decided to spend his whole master's project on looking at the rigid body modes of this aircraft and producing it basically producing them and having a way of analyzing them. So are people here familiar with rigid body modes for aircraft? So I'll basically just quickly brush through them. Basically, an aircraft is a dynamic system. So it will essentially resonate in different modes. So the actual response of the aircraft is kind of like a combination of all these modes. And the nice way of looking at the stability from the point of view of their modes is that you can look at how each mode, each motion contributes to the stability. So just really quickly, there's the basic modes are the phugoid, the short period, spiral, roll, and Dutch roll modes. The phugoid mode basically looks like that. It basically involves a change in speed, altitude, and pitch with constant angle of attack. So it's basically a longitudinal motion. And this is looking at the dynamic conditions of this. So it's not just looking at whether it's statically stable, whether it will return to equilibrium. It's looking at what's the frequency of that motion and what's the damping of that motion, because that plays a big role in how the aircraft handles. And actually, conventional aircraft are really practical because the tail gives you a really good mechanism of controlling these modes really well. Whereas on a flying wing, you don't have a tail and you can't control this as well. The short period, which is also particularly useful for characterizing aircraft handling, it basically involves a pure pitching motion, and it's relatively low, high frequency. So the other mode is a spiral mode. So this is not it's not an oscillatory motion. It basically it involves a gradual spiral motion like that one. I presume some people here have put an aircraft into a deep spiral. You're basically resonating the spiral mode when you're doing that, if that makes sense. And then the Dutch roll is a coupled lateral and directional motion that kind of looks like that. So the idea is, first of all of these modes have to be stable. And what I mean by that, I'll go back to this plot, is you don't need to worry about the math details of this, but control engineers like this representation for things, and they call this the complex plane, right? And basically the rules are your modes will appear somewhere in this complex plane. They're a solution to the equations of motion of the aircraft. So if the mode appears on this part of the plane, your aircraft is unstable. So it'll basically sort of diverge. If it appears on the negative side, it's stable. So that's the first thing to look at. You want your modes to be on that half. And then that plane gives you oscillation. So if your mode appears sort of here, it's stable, but it doesn't oscillate. If it appears here, it's stable and it's oscillating. And if it's there, it's oscillating with higher frequency. And the further it goes back down there, the higher it damps the motion. So the rules are, we want things to be here, not here. And the higher down there they are, the more damped they are. And the higher down there they are, the higher the frequency of that mode is. So basically he went and looked at our design. Well, he kind of messed it up because that's not the original design. But basically, without a vertical fin, with a vertical fin, with a longer tail boom and a vertical fin, and with a horizontal tail, And well, if we look at, say, that Dutch roll mode, which is basically a lateral directional mode, that's the effect of having a vertical tail. So that's with a vertical tail, and that's moving it backwards. So that's remember, basically that adds more damping to your Dutch roll motion. If you don't have a vertical tail, your spiral mode, which is this one, actually there is a range of center of gravity on which it's just about stable, but mostly it's unstable. It's just over that line, and it becomes positive. So basically for us, not having a vertical fin means we have an unstable spiral mode. We actually have a stable Dutch roll mode, which doesn't oscillate, and that's really funny. And I actually don't know what that means.
Maybe just a note to add as well. For the spiral mode, it is only just unstable, so it's very slowly diverging. And in fact, there are many aircraft that are flown today with a divergent stable. A divergent spiral mode. It's just very slow, so you can add a control input.
Yeah, because it's not oscillatory. So for a pilot to deal with something that's not oscillatory, it's actually relatively simple, because you're not going to fight dynamically with your plane. So yeah, it is actually possible to control an aircraft that is spirally slightly unstable. Because if it's too unstable, if it will be all the way here, then that would mean the aircraft would, like any disturbance, will cause it to just roll in a spiral. He looks at some really other interesting things, like what's the effect of the center of gravity. So a lot of people just quantify the stability using this static margin, which is the difference between your aerodynamic center and your center of gravity. But that just kind of tells you half of the story. It's interesting to see what that does to the modes. So this is actually just the effect. That's just the effect on the short period mode, because that won't change the lateral directional modes. Which basically shows how, as you increase your static margin, you don't just become more stable, but it's more damped, as we expect, and you get sort of an increase in frequency for that mode. So the handling actually significantly changes. Establishing exactly what that means in practice is it's not that straightforward, and there's like mixed opinions about how to do that. The effect of the CG on the phugoid mode is quite scattered, and I'm not going to get into that. But what was really interesting is look at the effect of the center of gravity on the set direction. And that's on the short period mode. So that's again just longitudinal motion. And essentially, a negative
Offset from the wings.
Center of gravity, which is basically downwards, actually adds damping to your short period mode and makes it slightly more stable, which is, I think, not that conclusive at the moment, but it shows that the hanging point in the set direction could be adding some stability to the aircraft, as it's actually known in practice, but it's nice to look at this here. And what are we looking at here? So the effect of the ZCG on the phugoid mode is actually a lot more clearer. And look at that, look at how when you well, basically, when your hanging point is very low, which is, say, about there, your Fugit is actually unstable because it's on this plane. But as you push the center of gravity downwards, that Fugit actually becomes stable. So it turns out that we're just about here, because our fuselage is about 1.25 meters long. So that's roughly about there. So we are just about stable for that Fugit mode. But if that's quite interesting, because if you keep pushing that down, you'll drive your Fugit mode even more stable. So that's yet another way of making your aircraft longitudinally stable.
Tie that in with the structural side, though. Of course, if you're going to make your aircraft CG lower and lower, you're actually going to add weight as well, because you're extending your fuselage and adding drag by doing that too.
I'll skip this because it's, yeah. Any questions?
Have you looked at the roll due to roll derivatives?
Roll due to roll.
Yeah, it's got such a huge span. If you're attempting to steer it by weight shift, I think the available rolling moment that you put in, as soon as you start to try and roll the wing, you develop more angle of attack on the downgoing one, less on the upgoing one, and you have very, very slow response, also generating some adverse yaw at the same time.
Yeah.
So I stick with your fin.
Yeah.
Fin.
I don't think we want to actually do fully weight shift
I don't think you can.
in roll. The reason I've left it, well, we've left it free to rotate, is because we don't actually need to rotate the fuselage in order to roll. So if it's going to roll, we really just want the wings to roll. We don't want to have the inertia of the fuselage fighting that.
That was the first question. Second one is you've got a very interesting layout, which I think has got some good features in, but why have you compounded your difficulty by designing it to be fast? Why don't you just get something to work which is not
I think that's
so quick,
probably a really good
doesn't
point.
require quite so much power?
I think we were just very optimistic about it.
Yeah.
I think, other than being optimistic as well, part of this solution was driven by our requirement for it to be fast.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It was.
Prize.
Yeah, so I think it was because originally when we first wanted to make a compound aircraft, we had saw the possibility of aiming for something like a competition such as a Kremer Prize or something like that.
Yeah.
And that sort of
I'm thinking, oh yeah, we'll be there in 4 months.
My,
put speed on the table, which led to the parasitic drag conclusions.
Okay. And my third question is, I think the crashworthiness of it coming down vertically, in particular, leaves a bit to be desired, and you might consider some of the measures that they use in paragliding to protect your spine if you've got a vertical descent. Because from what I saw, you've only got that much between your bottom and the tarmac. So, I mean, conform foam is worth considering for a start, because that's this dynamic foam that absorbs impact, but then it doesn't rebound.
Okay.
So an inch of that. It's a big problem for sailplane pilots. They all use just an inch of conform foam can make the difference between a bad spinal injury or not. So,
A test for that would be pretty cool.
the guy was here, may still be here.
Is it Tony Siegel?
Yeah,
I have his whole manual.
very good.
Yeah.
Well,
He was
you
here
know
this
about
morning
it.
and would have been watching it, but the ice competition was happening.
Okay.
He'll be here tomorrow if his wife is able to get him here.
He actually walked into.
Yeah, I saw him in the cafe.
Yeah.
He was busy making the
I think your comments, Bill, are quite right. I think this
Yeah.
applies to all HPAs, because all the ones I've seen really don't consider this problem at all. And I think something should be obligatory, like it would be in a paragliding harness, that you've got some sort of back support, some sort of foam support.
Some kind of
Yeah,
crash.
I don't know. In a paraglider, you really have got nothing. So
what do they implement for that
You
actually?
have a sort of back.
there are various solutions. They have airbags are quite popular. foam inserts.
Inertia-driven airbags.
No, just, well, I think there are some active airbags like that, but passive expanded polythene foam, for example. Which you could integrate into a bit of a fairing, perhaps.
Thanks.
Anyway, it's a good effort. I like it. Still like it.
Still?
Improvement video you've done.
I just wished it wasn't quite so fast.
Be so
Yeah.
stable. But I was thinking you got a lot of weight out the front there. So
Yeah, because the CG, I mean, on a flying plank, the only way to put the weight on the front is to hang a bottle of cyanoculate.
very good.